Hi readers, Chris here. Today I'm going to be doing my August wrap-up and my September TBR. August turned out to be a fantastic month. Fantastic. Not only did I read all of the books that I set out to read, but I actually added one more in. If you saw my vlog, you'll probably know which one that is. I also really enjoyed all the books I read in August, except for one. I pretty much loved every single book that I read. So that makes ranking them very, very difficult. But I'm going to jump in with the one book that I did not care for in August, which is A Forgery of Roses by Jessica Olsen. This is a YA fantasy with like a bit of a murder mystery mixed in, and it could have been something really cool. In this world, instead of a god like we would typically think of, they refer to their deity as the artist, and they use art, like painting, as a form of magic. On paper, that sounds really cool, but the execution of it, like, I was so confused reading this book. I did not understand how the magic worked. People can paint, but some people that can paint have magic. Other people that paint can't have magic. Sometimes you can use your paint to like fix a wound on someone. Sometimes you can bring people back to life. Sometimes what you paint, like you get the wound yourself. Like, it didn't make any sense to me, and about halfway through, I really stopped caring because it just didn't make any sense to me. So by the end of the book, and it is like a murder mystery, like a whodunit, but I really didn't care by the end. So I would have to say this book was pretty disappointing and definitely not something that I would recommend or revisit unless like you just have to read every single YA fantasy that's out there. Now on to all of the books that I actually liked in August. And again, this was really hard to rank because I loved all of these books, but something had to go first, so that is going to be Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is my first book by her, and I know she's quite popular for some of her other books like Mexican Gothic, Dr. Moreau's Daughter, and I thought that this was going to be a fantasy, actually, and it turned out not to be a fantasy or not fantastical. It's actually like a historical noir book. It takes place in Mexico, I think back in the 70s, and there's this girl named Mate. Her neighbor goes missing under mysterious circumstances, and there's a lot of like, oh, is she working for the government? She might have pictures that could be trouble for the government or certain groups. There's a lot of politicking. There's a lot of whodunit and this, that, and the other thing. And it was actually quite a quick read. I only started this book halfway through the month, and I blew right through it. Her writing is super easy to digest. I'm not someone that would normally read this type of book. I love fantasy and all that sort of stuff, but I found this book absolutely captivating. I couldn't stop reading it, and I cannot wait to read more from her. So Velvet Was the Night was a great book. The only reason it's lower on my list is because it wasn't what I was expecting, but that was just me, and I had to start somewhere. So sorry, but I still loved this book. Next up, another book that I, again, loved in August, and that is going to be A Grim Warning. This is the third book in the Land of Stories series, and I think this might be like the best book yet in this series. Like, it's really good. It's really good. First of all, I mentioned this in another video before, but our twins, our main characters, Connor and Alex, up until this point, like everything they've done has been together. They're a brother and sister team. They do everything together, etc., etc., etc. But in this book, they finally get to have their own journeys. They finally get to have their own unique development and not be so beholden to each other, which I thought was a really great change and a really great way to like advance the series forward and make these characters actually feel like they're growing up and not just going along with the series. So more to come on this one for sure, but I really enjoyed A Grim Warning. It's a little bit lower on my list because some of the other things I've read are like newer, so I have a new bias, but it was still a great story in this series, and definitely recommend if you're into middle grade fantasy or you have a younger person in your life that is. This is a wonderful series and I'm really enjoying it. Next up, another book that I enjoyed in August, which I'm going to say about all of them, and that is Blood and Ash by Jennifer Armentrout. I have never read anything by her before, but I hear that she's been compared to Sarah J. Maas and Laura Vasala, who I'm not sure who that is, and I can definitely see why, because this is basically a fantasy romance. So it is a fantasy, like a high fantasy, world building fantasy, all that stuff, but there's also a very, very, very strong romance, and a romance that gets pretty steamy at points. But I would say I actually like Jennifer Armentrout's writing better than Sarah J. Maas, because if you saw my review for Crescent City, my problem with Sarah J. Maas is that she's very vulgar. Like, it's a lot of cursing, and like even when it comes to her writing sex scenes, just the terms that she uses and the way that she describes things are vulgar. And here it was the complete opposite. The sex scenes in this book were sexy, they were hot and steamy, but without crossing the line of being vulgar. There is some cursing in here, but it is not nearly to the level that Sarah J. Maas's books are. So if Sarah J. Maas is a bit too much for you, I would say From Blood and Ash would probably be a good substitute. Now I will say there is one like teeny tiny problem that I had about this book. I'm not going to get into it here. I'll talk about it when I do my review. But let's just say there is something about the romance that did bother me a little bit, but I'll talk about that at a later point in time. Now we get into the top 3, which again are all amazing, starting with The Elite. This is the second book in the Selection series by Kira Cass, and I absolutely loved this book. Again, I think I might like The Elite better than the Selection. Like, there's just so much good stuff in here. So much good stuff. There's one scene in particular. No one in this world knows what Halloween is, but they learn about it through like someone's journal that in the past, so they used to have this thing called Halloween. So they like celebrate it at the castle. That's really fun. I like that some serious stuff happens in this book. It makes it a bit more serious than the first book. Like the first book is like The Bachelor meets the Hunger Games, and that's still going on in here, but it takes everything to like another level, which I really appreciate. Sequels are hard to do. This is a great sequel, and I really, really enjoyed this one. Finally, top 2, and these are kind of tied, really, like it's really hard to put one before the other, but I'm going to start with The Shadow of Gods, John Quinn, the number 2 spot. I did a buddy read with David over at David's Book Reviews. David and I both really, really liked this book. I'm not going to say too much more about it because we're going to do another video collab where we're both going to talk about it together. All I will say now is that I really liked this book. I'm pretty sure David really, really liked it too. And I can't wait to talk more about it this week. Finally, that brings me to my number 1 book of August, even though I loved all the other books that came before it, and that's going to be Needful Things by Stephen King. If you remember from last month, I wasn't even going to read this book in August. I was going to read a different book, and then I was like, oh no, I need to switch to Needful Things. This book was absolutely so surprising in the best way. I loved it. I had a fantastic time reading it. If you are a fan of Stephen King, if you've read a lot of Stephen King books, you need to read this book. This book is like a love letter to Stephen King fans. There are so many Easter eggs in here for like past books. So if you've read Cujo, if you've read The Dark Half, if you've read Misery, like if you've read any Stephen King books that came out prior to this one, You will love this book. It was so much fun. It's a bit of a slow burn, but I mean, most of Stephen King's books are. So I really, really loved it, and another book I can't wait to talk more about. So those are all the books I read in August. Fantastic month. I don't know how September is going to compare, but I'm going to jump in with my September TBR, starting off with my reader recommendation of the month, which is The Cursed Clones by Adam Hulsey, or Holes. Sorry, Adam, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I actually won this book from a giveaway from Steve over at Steve Talks About Books. So again, Steve, thank you so much for giving me this book. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get around to reading it. But actually, this is the last book that I had in my pile for recommendations. So if you're watching this video, I want you to tell me in the comments below what books you would like me to read before the end of the year. I was going to make a separate video asking for recommendations, but I'm just going to ask for it here. So depending on how many I get, I'll try and get through as many as I can before the end of the year. Next up, I am continuing my Stephen King journey with Gerald's Game. Gerald? I say Gerald. Gerald's Game. I don't know anything about this book, which I always think is exciting going in because I don't know what to expect, but I have heard some good things about this one. If you know anything about it, let me know. Otherwise, I will just find out as I go along. Next up, for my adult fantasy of the month, I'm going to be reading The Empire of Gold. This is the third and final book in the Davabad series by S.A. Chakraborty. If you've been hearing me talk about this series, this is an amazing, high fantasy series that's basically based on Egyptian and Middle Eastern lore. So we have a lot of jinn, magic carpets, all that sort of stuff. This book is quite chunky, so hopefully I can get through it by the end of the month. We'll see what happens. For my rando book of the month, I have a book that I have been wanting to read for a while. It's been on my shelf for years and I haven't gotten around to it, and that is going to be Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Now, I've only read her YA fantasy stories, like the Grishaverse stories, and this is an adult one. I picked it up at a Target sale, years ago, and it's just been sitting there. I figure it's September, it's back to school time. This is about a school. It's supposed to be like a dark academia, but an adult version, which I think it sounds cool. So I have heard some mixed reviews about it, but sometimes mixed reviews make me want to read things more because I want to find out what I think. So if you've heard any reviews on Ninth House, if you've read Ninth House, let me know what you think I'm in store for. For my YA fantasy for September, I'm going to be continuing the selection series with The One. Now, like I just said, The Elite was an amazing book. It was so much fun. I don't know how this one's going to possibly measure up, but I have really high hopes now, so we'll see if this book can live up to the hype. For my middle grade series, unfortunately, I did not have any more books in the Land of Stories series. All of those books I've gotten bargain book hunting, so I don't want to just go out and pay full price for another one, especially when I have so many other books that I could possibly read. So for now, I am taking a break from the Land of Stories series, and I'm going to switch to another series that I have been wanting to read for a while, and that is going to be Septimus Heap. This first book is called Magic. There's a ton of books in the series, and I'm pretty sure I have all of them. Well, at least most of them, if not all of them. And this is a series that I've had sitting on my shelf for years, for way too long. So it's time I finally dived in. I'm going to see how many of these books I can finish before the end of the year. And finally, this brings me to my book box book for September, and that is going to be Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley. This book is allegedly about two witches, and considering, we're getting into the fall season, I needed something with a witchy vibe. All I can say about this book is that I hope it's better than A Forgery of Roses. I mean, it's a pretty low bar, so I'm pretty sure anything would be better than that, but you never know. So hopefully Sweet and Bitter Magic will bring all the witchy vibes that I am hoping for. That is it for my August wrap-up and my September TBR. Meepers is very excited about all the books that I picked out, but I want to hear what you are reading in September. So if you didn't already leave a comment, let me know what books you are reading in September. Is it any of the ones I've mentioned? Probably not, because I feel like these books are really random this month, but that's okay. Let me know what you're reading, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel for more bookish stuff and more favorites coming your way soon. All right, everyone, happy reading. Who's a good girl? Who's my good meats?